Welcome to the Relationship Series podcast. My name is Ankush Jain, and each episode I'll be speaking to a different state of mind expert on the subject of relationships. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 29 of the Relationship Series. This week I'm joined by Erika Bugbee. She's a partner at Pransky and Associates and the third in the series of me interviewing her family, the Pransky family. And like her sister and her father, she's part of the consulting practice, which has been for 35 years based just outside of Seattle in Washington. And Erika joined the practice 15 years ago after finishing her undergraduate and graduate degrees in psychology. She does a whole host of speaking engagements and working with clients, and she co-created the online learning division of their company. Now, one of the areas of expertise that Erika's got, which is hopefully what's going to really come out in our conversation today, is helping couples. And we're going to really be talking about romantic relationships today. And Erika herself has been married for 17 years. She's got 2 kids and I'm told 2 poorly trained dogs. So she has lots of experience in the realities of relationships. So welcome, Erika.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Unfortunately, we're not doing this on dog training. I would have no credibility in that area.
No problem. So I like to start off every interview in the same way, and that is just to hear in your own words a little bit about yourself, what kind of brought you into this field. And I know you've got the family connection, and I asked your sister the same question, but I'm sure you weren't forced down this road. There was something that really connected you to studying psychology and then going further and helping couples in relationships. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your journey in your own words.
Great. It's interesting because I'm a very independent person. I specifically had no interest in doing anything that involved my parents when I was a teenager, the kind of teenager that thought my parents, were out to lunch. So I was not predisposed to being involved in the family business, but because I went through a really rough patch as a teenager and just got into, I call it the dark ages. I just spent 1.5 years, 2 years in just a really bad place. I wore a lot of black makeup, let's just put it that way. And if it hadn't been, essentially I was desperate enough to go to George, to my dad, for help because things were that bad after almost 2 years. And that
was when you were a teenager?
Yeah, I was a teenager. I was, I think, 14. And, not really wanting to be here anymore. And that very short conversation kind of, a light went off in my head about what he was saying after I, rolled my eyes, kind of walked away disgusted. But the kinds of things we talked about in this very brief conversation, I heard something in what he was saying, and it kind of, it affected me. What I heard and what he was saying affected me, and I started learning what he'd been pointing to in his work just for myself. And it completely turned me around over those next few months. I was a completely different person. I physically looked different. And so at any rate, when I went off to college, I assumed that that's what they were teaching in psychology, only to find that they're not, they're teaching quite the opposite of what I had learned. And that's where the passion to kind of do this, as my life's work, that's where it came from. I did it despite the fact that my parents were involved.
So I thank you for your frankness and your honesty there, and I'm sure people can relate to that. I'm sure the way you teach this, the way you share this with people has changed over the years. But what was it when you were 14? Can you remember what insight or what little bit stuck with you really from that early age that helped you to see that there was something about this? What was it that George said to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, basically what he said is that things, this is oversimplifying, but basically he said things look really bad when you're down. He said, I know how bad things look when you're down. And I was kind of like, well, they are bad. what do you mean they look bad? Like they are bad, everything about my life and school. I was getting horrible grades. Anyway, but what I realized is that there were times, implied in what he was saying was that there was sometimes it didn't look bad. And that had not been my experience. It looked like it was just 24/7 dark and awful. And I was just irritated constantly and angry pretty much at everyone. And if you talk to me, I started crying. But what I realized was that, well, actually, some days I wake up and I'm fine. And I sit around and make fun of people with my friends, and it's fun. And it hadn't occurred to me that it's not dark all the time. And that, oh my God, that just did wonders for me. So it was something about how, you're living in a perception of life. I thought what I was seeing is how things were, and that's how they were going to be the rest of my life, which is why I was suicidal. I had no interest in going on because it looked like that's how life was. So the fact that we kind of are living in this distorted view of life, that seemed to go up and down. Fortunately, it would lift. That's what got me. That's what made me kind of hopeful and got me interested, got my attention.
So is the difference with what you heard from George and what you heard from psychology, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, I'm going to explain in my words, and please tell me if you see it differently, is that, and I'm not an expert in psychology, but what I learned from, I guess, the self-help world, which is where I came from, is, okay, things might be really, really bad, but here's how to handle it better. Here's how to motivate yourself. Well, here's how to just get your head down and get through it. Whereas opposed to what I'm assuming George said to you, what you now share and I share and others share, is, well, if it looks like life's really bad, well then surely it's logical to have those thoughts. It makes sense. But rather than, well, just getting on with it and cheering yourself up or anything like that, it's about understanding that that's not reality, like you said. It's totally different. It's not about, well, trying to be happier or positive psychology or anything like that. It's about understanding that we genuinely are creating our experience of life moment by moment. And so it's all up in our own heads, that... and I only really started thinking about this recently, that I'm sitting in my room right now and I'm looking out at my room and I can see certain things around my room, and it probably should be a little bit cleaner than it is. But if I was a frog, randomly, I would see this room completely differently, and that would be reality for the frog. And actually, if I was just another human being sitting in my chair that I am now, I would see this room totally differently. And my whole life I'd gone about going, well, no, this is reality. I have no choice about how I perceive this. Surely everyone sees this the same way.
Well, yeah, see, that's the difference for me, is that I was certain that the reality I was seeing when I was down was the real one, and that there wasn't another one. But what was interesting is that, and when I felt better, my problems were still there. I hated my teachers. I hated sitting in class. I just didn't retain any information without a lot of repetition. So that was hard. But the days when I wasn't heavy and intense and I was just goofing around with my friends, my life looked like it was something I could find my way around. And each thing looked like it was, I could kind of see how to go about each thing. My life was just more user-friendly, and my problems were more user-friendly. So it's not like life was fantastic when I leveled out. But I did notice day to day that sometimes things looked overwhelming and too much, and there was no solution. Everything was bad, and it was never going to change. There was no solution. And when my spirits lifted and I was lighter and a little more happy-go-lucky and goofing around, I still didn't like my teachers, but I noticed, well, some of them I like. It's not all of them that I hate, and some of them I just don't like because they're boring. They don't, they're not antagonizing and making my life miserable. Some of them were, but most of them weren't. So the reality of things took on less of a dark color, and I just noticed the worse I feel, the worse things looked. So my perception was tied into how I felt, and I thought the reality I was seeing was just a fixed, constant thing, and that's so what I found myself just less interested in trying to take things on and worrying about things when things looked so bad, because I just saw how people get to be like a deer in the headlights, and there's nothing they can do at that point. You're too overwhelmed and you're thinking about everything at once. Your mind just is not a good operating system. But it would improve when I felt better, and that's what happened. Is I kind of just figured things out one at a time as I went along that year, and things were fine. And a lot of the things stayed the same but didn't bother me as much. So, and that's what I've found in not just in my parenting, but my relationship with my husband, and that's what's gotten us through having kids, and and all the things that people go through when their finances are tough, or the things that we've seen break up our other friends' relationships, because we keep watching people get divorced. Our friends that all got married at the same time, most of them aren't still together, and I can see how, if I had been stuck in that mode that I was in before, of just believing everything's as bad as it looks when you're down, I would absolutely be divorced. And in fact, I can tell you when it would have happened. So it's and that's one of the things I think that people are looking for, the kind of in relationships, people are looking for kind of enjoyment and freshness. That's one of the first things to go. That people go, I find, at least in my work and in my, our friends, we see this, that couples go one of two ways. They either end up kind of becoming utilitarian in their relationship, where I just talked to two couples yesterday, exactly the same problem. That they do great as kind of business partners, running their household, parenting and finances. Somehow they're just this well-oiled machine functionally, but there's, the feeling's gone. It's empty. And, one of the couples, their kids are grown and gone, and they're kind of like, well, what am I doing with this person now? There's nothing here. There's no excitement. So they work well together, but it's dried up. They've lost the connection, the kind of connection. Or people go, so that's one way people go, and the other way people go in our experience is they just don't, they don't like each other anymore. They don't, and that's their new normal. They're, when their mate's around, they're kind of annoyed, they're critical, if they're not saying it out loud, they're in their mind picking apart the things they do constantly that they don't like, or that they feel put out, or, they're kind of frustrated with their bad habits or whatever. So people go take one of those two paths, and then they're in this holding pattern, and they don't really want a divorce, but they don't know how to get that back. And I think that does not fix itself. So I think people know inherently, okay, something has to change, and I'm going to have to do something about it because I'm watching this, and it's not good. And I don't want to be in the 50% of the population that gets divorced. So that's where we come in, and that's where essentially that's where I was as a teenager. Is I don't like where this is going, and I don't see how it's going to change.
And I know, so typically, and I think I spoke about this on the interview with George, that people that go into counselling or therapy don't have a very high rate of success of their marriage lasting.
Right.
And yet at your firm, it seems to be kind of a very high rate of people coming in. And so obviously you guys are doing something different, but someone might be listening to this, there might be some listeners who might be thinking, come on, Erika, really, you've not met my husband or my wife. Can this really change? Can this really be turned around? Or is this just inevitable? We've grown apart, we've become different people. And what would you say to someone like that?
Well, there's two things I would say about that, and I like that question, because I think it should be asked. I think, one of the things that we're assuming by the time people get to us is that they want to make it work. And some people come here and, get their heads they step back far enough to look at things, and they realize, this doesn't make sense for us to be together. I'm out. And that's a perfectly valid place to be. So we're not saying it doesn't matter who you're married to, just pick someone and we'll show you how to love them. That's your call. So we don't have a hard and fast position on whether people stay together, but what we are suggesting to people is that how we feel about the people that are around us, who we're married to, our family, the people we work with, our neighbors, whatever, has to do with what's going on inside of us and not who those people are. So we don't care who you pick, but we're pretty sure that whoever you commit to, if you are interested in finding out what it takes to bring the freshness and enjoyment into that relationship on your part, it's absolutely 100% doable. But you do have to want it to work, or it's not going to work. So it's kind of the philosophy of where there's a will, there's a way. In the same way that you hear about all those anomalies in the medical field where the doctors will say you're never going to walk again. People are constantly walking after doctors have told them they're not going to walk again, because it's within the human spirit is just capable of amazing things. We just really don't apply ourselves. And sometimes it's because we don't want to. So, or we don't have the vision for it, or we've lost hope. So this conversation we're having, this podcast, is really for the people who are, looking at someone that they're in with, or when they find that person, let's say they're dating, this is the how to get there if the will is there. This is the how to do that.
And does the will need to be there from both parties? Because I know I sometimes speak to people and they know the podcast that I do, and they might say, well, I really love my husband, or I really love my wife, and I really want to make it work, but I don't know if they do.
That's the thing is that's the interesting part of relationships. You don't get to know that. You have to throw yourself in it and do everything that you can do and see what that does. This is oftentimes what we find is couples who have tried everything and tried to make it work, and one person and nothing's worked, and then one person will change inside of them, and we see this every day pretty much. You change what one person brings into the relationship, and it just changes the chemistry of the other person, because we're social creatures. We're built that way. It's impossible for us not to get affected by people around us. We just generally we're not really doing what we can ourselves. And that's what we're interested in is, look, if you show up and you do your part, that's your best chances for getting this relationship to work, rather than waiting for the other person or giving us reasons why you don't think you should have to do that. So that's the thing, is you won't really know till you get there. But statistically speaking, when people bring their, find a way of finding their enjoyment and their fondness for somebody else, when people are fond of us and like us, we're different with them. And so it changes whether we're in and whether we're willing to do what it takes and make things work with that person, whether they're a friend or you see what I mean? So it's kind of it's a good question, but it does still point back to, it has to start with you.
Right, and I find that, again, typically people that are asking that question, the next thing is that kind of follows from that is, it's not me, it's them. They're the issue. Well,
that's one of the things is that's what it looks like to people. We get that question a lot. Is there's three things that, in terms of how to refresh or bring the life back into a relationship, get it back to where it was when you first met the person and everything was fun. That really comes down to three things every single time. The first thing is you have to want to make it work. If you don't want to make it work, there's nothing we can do to help you, right? It's kind of like losing weight or going to the gym or whatever. So you have to be in and game and on board. to do what it takes. The second thing is you have to feel like it's possible to change the culture of a relationship with just starting with you. That you're not holding out and really only sort of trying because you're not sure if they're going to try or you're not sure if it's going to work. It just doesn't work that way. You have to kind of, like sports is that way. There's teams that are like the underdog, and yet they come through and end up winning the game against a better team and against all odds because they throw themselves in there and they feel like it's possible. There's all this, just all these capabilities that we have as human beings that are built into us that come to life and are kind of at our fingertips. So there's the wanting it to work, there's the feeling like it's possible, and they're seeing that you and I have a huge part in what kind of climate we have in our relationships. It looks like it's dependent on the other person, their personality or their commitment or, what kind of history you guys have or their communication style or whether you pick the right person. But what I'm going to be talking about is, well, actually, you have way more power than you realize to influence, and that's really the in a way to make this kind of, to show you where we're headed here, the big picture of what I'm going to be talking about and what's possible for relationships is there's the idea that, I don't remember where this quote came from, but there's this quote, the key to a good marriage is falling in love with the same person over and over again. If you ask, if you interviewed people that have been together for 50 years, they'll all point to the same thing, and basically what they're going to be pointing to is, it's your state of mind, it's your attitude. They're going to be pointing to something inside of themselves. They're not pointing to how you do the relationship. It really comes down to each person and what happens inside of them. So that quote essentially draws attention to human being's ability to fall in love, to feel close and fond, and to enjoy things, not just people, not just their mate, but life. And that's really, if you watch relationships, or if you spend 15 years like we have, learning about them, there's one thing that is common to all of them, and that they started out in this kind of exciting, curious, interested in each other, staying up all night talking on the phone or whatever, and then they're not interested anymore. Well, it's the same person. And if you have couples that are together a really long time and are still into each other, they would say, oh, I'm learning more and more about them every day. There's kind of a, almost an admiration or an affinity, a fondness that you feel. And it's in the eye of the beholder in the same way that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's what I think everybody on one level or another knows that, because we use that. It's often that's how we get through life. For when you're relaxed, for example, you can enjoy anything. So if I put you on vacation, well, not everybody's like some people get really sped up on vacation, but if you take someone on vacation who's relaxed, you can pretty much put them in a ghetto and they'll find beauty and connection with people. If you put me on an airplane, I don't care. As soon as I leave my house, I'm relaxed. I don't care if there's traffic. I'm like, hey, I'm on vacation. We're all, in some capacity, we understand that enjoyment is a state within us. And if you do that while you're sitting in front of your mate, they will be as exciting, believe it or not, as they were when you first met them. And I think that's what people don't understand, is it looks like the person changed or isn't interesting anymore. But if you take an interested person and you put them in the same room as your mate, as your partner, they will become interesting to that person, and they're not making it up. So the idea here is that you do have to consider that there's something, that what you're looking for is it lives inside of you. The enjoyment, it's a state of enjoyment. It's not something, you don't have to be in front of something enjoyable. The source of enjoyment is within people's minds.
Right, and it can be something that is very, very enjoyable to one person, can be like a nightmare situation to someone else.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Like opera. My dad, I'm hoping he doesn't listen to this podcast.
We won't tell him. It's just between you and
okay,
I,
don't tell him,
Erika.
yeah.
No one knows. No one's going to tell him. It's okay. It's our secret.
He loves opera. I cannot stand opera. It's one of those things in life where if you put opera in my environment, I have to get out of there. For some reason, I just have this very strong negative reaction to it. But he loves it, and in fact, it's an interesting point because this is where we're pushing the envelope with people. And is that I know I don't like opera. I'm not blaming the opera because I understand I don't like something. It's because of what I'm doing in my mind while it's happening. And everybody on one level or another knows that. If I wanted to, I could hang in there long enough to see what opera has to offer. And I haven't gotten there with opera yet. But I go to operas every once in a while with him. He's so into it. But I am interested. There's something here to like, and I'm interested in what it is. I can tell you with certainty that there's a matter of time before I get there. I see something. And that is pointing to the idea that I know the source of enjoyment, that enjoyment is in the eye of the beholder. Now, if I made up my mind that opera is stupid or is terrible and unlikable, I would not have the openness and I wouldn't hang in there enough to like it, which is essentially what, they say first impressions, how important first impressions are of people. They're only important if you don't consider that maybe, you have to hang in there a little bit and acquire a taste for that person. That's something that we've done with a lot of our friends, family members, bosses. We didn't like them at first. But if you give your mind a chance to reorganize and see something different, the likability is there. You just have to find what it is about that person. And it's going to be different for you than for other people, but there's people that you like that other people don't. And you would say they just don't understand them. So the potential is there, but if you think it's not possible, you're not gonna try. And that's what we're saying is you do have to get the hang of how to learn to enjoy somebody and how to look for the freshness. And I don't know, you have to understand that your mind is bringing you a certain kind of information about your mate. That if I watched you and you watched me, there's certain kinds of activities that we do in our head when we're around our partner, and that lands us in a very predictable set of feelings. So if I'm annoyed with how he loads the dishwasher and, I have this shelf. I have 2 kids, so we have shoes everywhere. And I have this shelf. I had to make a shelf where all the shoes go because it was mayhem. And my husband will put the shoes, not that I'm super organized, but he'll put them near the shelf, but in the walkway, and it just irritates me. So I think there's a shelf, a whole shelf just for shoes. Just put the shoes, just one more step and they're in the shelf. That's on, I'm doing that. I don't have to do that, but I'm doing that, and when with the people that we don't pick apart, we enjoy. We just take them in and we get to know them, and that's what we're pointing to is our ability to not like somebody and our ability to like somebody more and more over time is on us. It comes down to what we're doing in there and how much we're willing to run with that, how interested we are in where that takes us. And I'm saying if you don't wake up to where you're going with your partner, you're going to end up in one of those utilitarian relationships, or you're going to end up in just a bad feeling for them because that's what you've been doing this whole time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and something that I've been thinking about this year is, and I don't know if this is a truth, this is just something that I've noticed, is that quite often the people that I get irritated with or the people that I dislike are often the people that can really teach me the most about life. And so rather than thinking about people that I'm irritated with or about or anything like that, I'm not really clear in my head. I'm not really seeing how they are. I'm putting a lot of feeling onto that. I'm putting a lot of thinking around that.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often when I do tend to realize that and leave it alone, there's quite often stuff in there to learn for me.
Yeah, I think, yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I think that that's what, you know, after you've lived a certain amount of years in life, you kind of, you know, you don't trust your perceptions of things as much. You know, you don't write people off as fast, or you do, but you end up kind of reluctantly having to talk to them anyway, and then you find, okay, they're not that bad. That I think people have discovered that it's kind of up for grabs how you feel about people and whether they're a bad thing or a good thing, in the same way that, you know, we don't always know just because, you know, when there's some turn of events in life, something that doesn't work out, you know, with a little bit of maturity, people start to realize, well, oftentimes that's the story of how things worked out better. I don't know how that's happened. I don't know how that's going to happen here, but, you know, we don't get a job or whatever. We end up with, well, I'm glad we didn't get it because this happened. So in the same way, like, what's going on in life and whether something's good or bad, whether something's likable or not, changes constantly. So it's a little bit hard to set up camp in your opinions that you formed already about life and your judgments. And essentially that's what I'm saying is we live in a whole bunch of judgment about our partners, and we're suggesting that's not truth. That's just where you've landed because you're a little judgment factory in there, or whatever you do. That's people live in the climate that their little psychology has built for them, that their thinking is built for them. They've set that up, and which is kind of, I don't know. It sounds very simplistic, and it is simplistic for the purposes of trying to sum up something in a podcast. But that's what's happening, not just in our relationships, but that's what's happening in life, and we can see it. Like, you know, it's funny that you just did podcasts with Kara, George, and I, because the three of us, every Thursday, we're going tonight, we go to the movies. We go to dinner and a movie every Thursday night. And it's funny because on different nights, one of us will love dinner and love the movie, no matter what the movie. And one of us will not really like dinner and not really like the movie. And then the next week it's somebody else. And it doesn't seem to matter, you know, there's a small area, so we pretty much are going to the same restaurants all the time. You never know who's going to enjoy their evening and who's not, because it completely depends on what we're doing in there. So when I have a lot of stuff on my mind, I can't connect to the movie, and I'm restless and bored. It's too long. I pick out all the bad accents, or I'm not buying the chemistry between the two people. So if you watch people, even in a fixed setting where everybody's watching the same movie and having the same dinner, the level of enjoyment changes every week. And that's just an example, another example outside of relationships of what's really running your relationship. That's what you're bringing. I'm bringing that operating system and that psychology to my relationship, and I was bringing it to my life as a teenager, so that life looked bad and messed up, and then it looked like, well, it's not so bad. Well, that's how my relationship looks. It totally is a function of my mind and what's happening in it, you know, moment to moment.
So you've just got me thinking about the film Shrek, because years and years and years ago, I was on an aeroplane. I think I was coming back from India, and Shrek was on the plane, and I'd never seen it, but I'd heard good things. But I was like tired, I was half asleep, and I forced myself to stay awake to watch the movie because I'd heard so many good things about it. and I really didn't enjoy it. And so I wrote it off as like the worst movie ever.
Right.
And I think it was like a year or two later I went back and watched the same movie again, and I was like, this is hilarious. This is the
Isn't
best
that funny?
funny film ever. How did
I not like
Yeah.
this movie?
It's you just kind of brought up that memory, from a while ago that about movies and seeing them differently.
See, that's what we want to point to, and oftentimes that's why our program is, we have an on-site program is 4 days long, and people call us and say, well, can I do it in 3? I only have 3 days off work. We say, no, it really takes 4 days. We're telling you something really simple, but it's really hard for people to consider that their experience or their perception of life is not accurate. But then you hang in there and you kind of suggest different, you use enough examples and you teach them a little more about how this kind of the invisible forces, inside your head, how those are operating and that's running your life. All of a sudden you start to see all the cracks, and it looks and it explains why your first impression so often isn't right, and how why something looked like a horrible thing and then all of a sudden it turned out to be a gift. That or how your partner is kind of a nightmare one day and then the next day he's fun again. It's all that. I mean, partly obviously your partner changes day to day too, but our experience of our relationship and our kids and everything else in our life really changes. And once you start pointing it out, it's really hard to deny, what's happening inside me is more relevant and important than anything happening outside of me. So that what I'm looking for is, we're essentially pointing people toward you have to understand how your mind works, because that's where everything is happening. It doesn't look like it. It looks like a terrible movie. I was like that. So funny. It was exactly like that with The Matrix. That movie, The Matrix?
Yeah. It's one of my favorite films ever.
Well, mine too. When I first saw it, I was tired, and I was at somebody's house, and I want to go home, and it smelled like dog, and, I hate Keanu Reeves. I'm really sorry. I hope he's not watching this, because
he's actually one of our biggest fans. He's on every episode. But...
Good. Well, you can edit that out then. But he just was so flat, and I just was picking him apart. So I hung out with my irritation with Keanu Reeves for the entire movie, and I hated it. And then a friend of mine was like, oh my God, that's my favorite movie. And it bothered me because he and I are so on the same page about everything. And so I watched it again. I had the same experience as you. I said, this is great. What was wrong with me? But that's, for the people listening, I had to do this too. Don't take our word for this in anything that we say, at least at Pransky and Associates. Don't take our word for it. You have to go see. Consider the truth of what we're saying, or the grain of truth in it, and go out into your life and look and see that the enjoyment for your partner, they can be in the same bad mood, and sometimes it gets to you more, and sometimes it gets to you less. They can be in a good mood and be themselves, and you're irritated with everything that they're doing. And sometimes you feel close to them and grateful that you have a partner, and sometimes you feel like things would be easier without them. It's tied to you and your mind, and not them. At the very least, I'm hoping people will walk away feeling like it has not just something to do with them, but a lot to do with them. How much enjoyment they have, and when we're suggesting that it has everything to do with them.
Yeah, and also I'd probably suggest if you're one of those people listening to thinking, why would I ever need 4 days to understand something like this? I don't even need 3, I'd probably need 2. I tend to find those are the people that probably need to do it for 8 days, right? Or take longer. It's one of those people like, I'm too busy to take a holiday. They tend to be the people that need a break more than average.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the more overwhelmed people are by their lives, or the less hope they have, the less inclined they are to get help. And that's the irony, as we're telling people, well, if you can't find the time, you're going to live the rest of your life like that. And I think that's what that's what's so interesting about relationships is, and parenting is so this way, and work, my working life has been this way, but your first couple, as you get older, you get into your 20s and your 30s, you kind of realize, oh, I had all these problems, and I can see really obvious answers, but I was so in a compromised state. I was essentially under duress, so I was doing things really, I wasn't seeing the obvious. I look back and I kind of see what happened and see my part, and I handled it so badly that we see how we get under duress and then we don't really collect ourselves. We never really calm down and get out from under the intensity in order to handle things. So when we look back, that's why they say hindsight's 20/20. And that's what happens in relationships is people get really intense and down on things, and then they look out at their relationship and at their partner, and it looks like a complete mess, like my life did as a teenager. So it's not until people see for themselves that, oh no, wait a minute, my relationship, it's exactly the same today, but it looks different than it did yesterday or a few days ago. I'm feeling a little more soft and open and, sweeter and fond of him. All of his shortcomings will look different to you. All of your mate's shortcomings will look different. So people do have to kind of see for themselves that things are changing, and that they have so much more power than they realize. They get the kind of feelings that they want, and that's what inspires people.
So be honest with us. Maybe we're going to get a little bit personal now.
All right.
And I know you've spoken about your husband a little bit, but what's it really like after 17 years? So you said your friends have got divorced, and you have your little things, but real life, what's it like after 17 years, knowing what you know and living with this man?
It's interesting because I think the biggest thing that's changed for me is that my level of respect for him has gone up. There was a period of time where you see what you get to know them enough, and you've lived with them long enough and relied on them to see all of their weaknesses. Hopefully I've seen them all, I don't know. I'll let you know. But you really get to know every side of them. There's nowhere to hide after 17 years. It's all out there. And there's a period of time at which, because you can see where they're weak, they look like a big mess. And you're kind of like, what am I doing with this person? I have it so together and they're such a mess. And then you have these moments where you're like, what are they doing with me? I'm this huge mess. I hope they don't figure it out and leave me. You just go through that. So, you go up against it just enough in relationships and in life where you get these kind of raw feelings. And what's so interesting is I've realized that the trying to figure out how it is that, you see how to say this, I've realized that there's things about him that I haven't discovered yet. That it used to be that when I'd look at all of his weaknesses, it felt like, well, that's him in a nutshell. That's all he has to offer. And then I realized, well, no, there's other things he brings to the table. And then realizing, wow, he's actually, the things that he does different, a lot of the things that he does different, he does better. And I think, you go in a relationship or you go through life long enough and you start to see that you have your shortcomings too. And there's something in, instead of trying to convert them to your ways and wishing they were like you, that's changed. And I feel like, thank God he's good at things that I'm not good at. And I just don't care anymore about his shortcomings because I know everybody's a mess in their own way. And I've stopped tracking it and caring and feeling like I have to build a case and then bring it to him so that I can change him. That, first of all, is impossible. But it's just taken so much of the activity level out so that we just hang out a lot more of the time, and I'm not collecting data on his issues. That's just disappeared. So it's lighter. I don't know, it's funnier. There's a lot of, I don't know, we just joke around a lot. And when you have a 14 and 11-year-old, you know, the humor gets pretty low grade, but I don't know, there's just a lot more of kind of doing nothing and hanging around that did not used to happen because everything was more serious.
Well, that's a lovely place for us to finish today. Thank you for sharing that, your stories and a little bit of an insight into the work you do with couples. I know we've barely scratched the surface today, but thank you for that. Thank you for offering that. Thank you for your time today. I know a lot of people get value from this, so it's been great. Erika will be offering the audio Maintenance-Free Relationships for absolutely free to all listeners of this podcast. In order to get this audio, please visit the Pransky and Associates website and use the download code RELATIONSHIP. The link is on YouTube for this video and also on my website. This was the Relationship Series podcast with me, Ankush Jain. Please note, as well as listening via YouTube, you can download this and every episode straight to your smartphone via iTunes or Stitcher. If you like this episode, please subscribe, share it online, and leave us your feedback. Thanks for listening.